So I've got to be honest with you guys. Up until recently while playing Baldur's Gate 3, I haven't been a huge fan of the casting classes. And looking at the stats that Larian released from a few months ago, it looks like you guys aren't really either. While Gale may be the first overall chosen origin character and Sorcerer is the second most played casting class, the other casting classes fall off pretty quickly. And I told you guys to quit sleeping on the Cleric, and yet you guys are still putting Cleric in last place. The Cleric's good. Don't think of the Cleric as a healer. But if you're like me and you've been sleeping on the casting class, let's talk about a few different ways that you might improve your ability as a spellcaster within Baldur's Gate 3. Some of these are going to be very straightforward and simple, and some of these may be things that you haven't really thought of. But hopefully you guys find these helpful, and if you do, make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get notifications of new videos like this. And if you hadn't thought of any of these, if these seemed obvious but you hadn't been doing them, or you just found any of this video helpful, then make sure to comment down below and let me know what you found helpful. If you knew these things but you have any other advice for other people that want to get into spellcasting classes but don't really love the class, leave those comments down below too. And if you don't have anything else to say, then just comment your favorite emoji. Remember that your comments are a massive help to the channel. They go towards engagement and they help other people find this video. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. All right, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about 8 ways, at least right now. If I think of more, we'll change the number. But yes, 8 ways that you might improve your abilities as a spellcaster in Baldur's Gate 3. We're gonna quickly change that to 9 because this one I don't even want to include in the list, but let's call this an honorable mention. That's going to be, make sure to long rest, guys, and short rest. Really, just rest. Your characters get tired sometimes. And I mean that only slightly jovially, because if you're playing as a spellcaster, it's not going to be fun if 90% of the time you're using Firebolt and Ray of Frost. Like, yeah, you have Fireball, you have Call Lightning, use them. It's not that expensive to take a long rest. Even if you're playing Tactician or Honor Mode where you have to use 80 supplies, you can very easily, if you're opening chests, if you're pickpocketing people, or just trading with the traders in the world, it is not hard to get enough supplies to long rest so that you replenish your spell slots. It's really hard to break that hoarding mentality that we have where spell slots are a resource, kind of like potions and scrolls. And we want to save them for the battle that really, really matters. But here's the thing, just rest, and then you'll have those resources back. And that doesn't just apply to casting classes either. Warlocks only need a short rest and then they get their spells back. So make sure you're short resting, but also think about if you're playing a fighter, you want to have those maneuvers if you're playing a battle master. Don't not use your maneuvers because you're afraid you're going to need them later. Just short rest or take a long rest if you're out of short rests. Use your channel divinity charges. Rage as a barbarian. Use your class features, and when you're out of them, just take a rest. Please, so many of my friends that I know that play this game just don't use their abilities because they're afraid they're going to need them later. They treat them like resources and then they don't have them. Please just rest. You will enjoy the game so much more if you're actually using the abilities of your class and of your race. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about entry number 1, and that's going to be don't play Baldur's Gate 3 as a spellcaster like you were a kid and played Pokemon. And don't get all innocent. You know exactly what I mean. When you were a kid and you played Pokemon, I guarantee it doesn't matter which Pokemon you had in your party, every single one of them had an attacking move, had a move that dealt damage. Unless you were that guy that had a Pidgeotto that had Sand Attack, which screw you. I'm kidding, I definitely used that to beat Brock in the first gym. But no, seriously, in Baldur's Gate 3, don't only take spells that do damage. There are so many instances, whether it's for role-playing purposes, crowd control, or protecting your allies, you are going to want to have spells that buff, debuff, control the land and the environment around you. And once you learn how to control and use these powers effectively, you are going to see just the next level that the spellcaster can take you to. I know it's really sexy to think about the amount of damage you can dish out with Chain Lightning as a sorcerer, or it's really tempting to just think about it disintegrate and maybe get that 100 damage to just make someone disappear. But plant growth as a druid can be just as effective, reducing the amount that your enemies can move so they basically can't move at all. Especially if you combine that with like darkness or some other area of effect things that can really slow down the movement on the battlefield and control your enemies. Because remember, you as the spellcaster are not the only member of your party. You are going to try to work in tandem with the fighter, with the barbarian, with the warlock. And so you don't need to be the sole damage dealer. You don't need all of your spells to deal damage because you can work in concert with them, let them deal the damage, and you control the situation so that they have their best chance to deal the most damage possible. Again, while it's really sexy to just cast Chain Lightning, a little first level Fairy Fire can really make a huge difference for your attackers on your team. It's gonna help Astarion get all of his sneak attacks, and it's gonna help Lae'zel make sure that she's landing all of her disarming strikes. So resist the temptation to be a kid playing Pokemon, or maybe in some cases an adult playing Pokemon, and make sure to get some of those buff and debuff spells. Tip number 2 directly relates to tip number 1. That is going to be, for the most part, with some exceptions, your first and second level spell slots, and I'm talking a little bit later on in the game, don't use those for damage. Use those for buffs, debuffs, area control if you can. And here's the reason why. Your cantrips are going to scale with you throughout the game. Your first and second level spells are not. So let's be honest, that chromatic orb, your burning hands, that's not gonna do a whole lot for you in Act 3. Probably. And if you're in a situation in a boss fight where you are down to where you only have Burning Hands as your only spell up because you've used all of your other spell slots, trust me, you have bigger problems on your hands. Can't see what I did there? Instead, keep some useful spells like Feather Fall or False Life, Sleep, Spike Growth. Again, those buff and debuff heavy spells that I talked about in number 1. I know there are some really powerful buff and debuff spells at higher spell slots, but sometimes those low level buff and debuff area of control buffing spells for your allies can be really helpful and can turn the tide of a major boss battle way more than Burning Hands or Chromatic Orb's probably going to. So do yourself a favor and ditch some of those really poor first and second level spells and replace them with some things that are going to buff your allies, debuff your enemies, control the terrain, and I think you're gonna find a lot more success. Now moving on to tip number 3, that's going to be a very specific and contradictory case to tip number 2, which is Magic Missile. In my opinion, if your class can have Magic Missile, always try to keep Magic Missile with you. There are a couple of reasons for this. I know that I just said that lesser amounts of damage probably aren't going to be super important, but sometimes one, you need a 100% chance to hit something, especially if something's got a really high defense. So it can be helpful in some cases to upcast Magic Missile to a high level spell just to guarantee you're going to land some hits, especially if that boss is really close to being dead. But more importantly, there are some very specific situations where Magic Missile is potentially the best solution to a fight. I'm thinking very specifically, if you're fighting the Hag in Act 1, who creates illusory copies of themselves, you can use Magic Missile to target the different illusory copies to break the illusions so you don't have all of these hags casting spells on you. Yes, there are some ways around this, like to have your rogue with 2-hand crossbows and a thief bonus action so that you can shoot them all. And yes, I'm also aware that if you're playing on honor mode, then you get punished for doing that. But that's not the only example of where this is useful. Say you're fighting Orin on the honor mode difficulty, and she has that legendary action where she has, I think, 15 unstoppable charges. Spamming Magic Missile at Orin is one of the most effective ways to reduce all those stacks of unstoppable. And if you don't want to waste one of your spell slots using Magic Missile, then there's gear that gives you Magic Missile. You could have scrolls of Magic Missile, but have some Magic Missile handy. That's my recommendation. All right, moving on to tip number 4. This is a problem that I myself run into pretty often when I play as a druid or if I play as a cleric. That's going to be careful of how many concentration spells you're carrying around with you. Remember, you can only cast one concentration spell at a time, and if you cast a second one, it's going to end the effects of your first concentration spell. As a druid, I have literally found myself in the situation where every single one of my spells was a concentration spell, and I'm like, well, crap. I cannot do a whole lot from a spellcasting perspective now, huh? Because I need plant growth down here because it's preventing my enemies from physically moving. But boy, some of these other spells would be really great too. And I guess as a corollary, make sure you're reading your spells. Make sure that if you're concentrating on a spell, pay extra attention. Is the next spell you're about to cast also concentration? Because it doesn't feel good if you're concentrating on a spell and then you accidentally cast another concentration spell and like, ah, crap, I just screwed myself by not having that one there. So be really careful and make sure that you're balancing out those concentration spells. Otherwise, you might be in trouble whenever you need to cast some other spells and you don't have the ability to do that. All right, so tip number 5 is going to be a very specific tip, and it is very specifically for Act 3. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about this in Act 1 and Act 2, and honestly, I would talk to Withers and really only do it in Act 3. But I'm gonna tell you this right now. If you are playing as a sorcerer or a wizard, one of the best feats that you can get for your character is going to be dual wield. But why would I want dual wield? I'm not going to be dealing damage with weapons. Why would I want to carry an extra weapon in my offhand? I'm so glad you asked. It enables you to carry a weapon that is not light in the offhand. Like say, I don't know, a quarterstaff. In Act 3, there are 2 very specific staves. Both of them give you the ability, I think it's called Arcane Battery or Free Cast for the Illithid Power. Either way, it enables you to cast a spell without utilizing a spell slot once per long rest. If you have dual cast, you can carry both of them, giving you 2 arcane batteries. One of them is the Staff of Spell Power, which I believe you get in the House of Hope. The other one, let's see if I can pronounce this word. Markoheshkir? Maybe we're gonna go with that. But you get that one in Ramesses Tower, the tower where Lorowoken is. And if you're dual carrying these and you want to combine that with, say, the Illithid power that allows you to free cast, and then if you want to get really fancy and you want to combine that with, say, 2 levels of fighter and have action surge, if you're, say, a sorcerer, you could do a 6th level spell, action surge, do another 6th level spell because of the arcane battery, quicken spell, do another 6th level spell. Just 3 chain lightnings you can do all at once in one turn. Massive spoilers for the end of Baldur's Gate 3, but in the final boss battle atop the final boss, I managed to kill every single person on there pretty easily on Tactician because in one round of combat, I just dealt like 3 chain lightnings and just wiped everyone. I know that's min-maxy, but God, it felt really good to be that powerful. So don't sleep on dual wield in Act 3 as a spellcaster. Now, tip number 6 is probably pretty intuitive, and it can be very easily simplified to don't get hit. But moreover, it's find clever ways to not get hit. Because if you haven't noticed, you're gonna be hella squishy. So I would very, very strongly recommend having some potions of invisibility, having some scrolls of invisibility, have cast invisibility or greater invisibility as your spells. But unless your enemies specifically have the ability to see invisibility, as long as you cast that and step away, they're not going to be able to detect you, and that's a great way to stay alive in combat. And I imagine that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't play spellcasters, because it's so easy to die. Just you have to think of intuitive ways to not die. Another really great example is, Shadowheart, whenever I have her in my party at all times, because Sanctuary, it's probably one of my favorite level 1 spells. I always cast Sanctuary on my sorcerer, assuming that they're not about to take a turn, because that is for the most part going to protect me from everything the enemies would want to do. So make sure if you're going into a boss battle that you have some mechanisms prepared to get your sorcerer out of combat or out of harm's way. Now, next up, tip number 7 is once again, probably going to seem really intuitive, but I bet you're not doing it as much as possible. And I will also say, do this if it makes sense for your party from a role-playing perspective. If one of your characters is a lawful good paladin, this may not play well with your party, and for role-playing purposes, you may not do that, and I respect that. But if there's nothing role-playing that's preventing you from doing this, have Astarion steal all of the scrolls. And see, you heard me say a couple of scrolls. No, I mean all of the scrolls. Because like every single vendor in the game is carrying a bunch of scrolls. Some of them are garbage, like Firebolt and Ray of Frost, and you can skip those, but a lot of them have like Fireball and Greater Invisibility and Cloud Kill. Phenomenal spells. And there's no reason to not just pickpocket them with Astarion, because those are honestly pretty damn easy to pickpocket. We're getting a little off topic here, but if you're going to do this, one, make sure you get the Gloves of Thievery. Very easy to get. You get them from the Zentrum in Act 1. It's really funny whenever you buy the Gloves of Thievery and then you equip them to steal back from the Zentrum. That's fun. That's a side point. Equip the Gloves of Thievery on Astarion, and then, I don't know, give him guidance before he goes in and starts pickpocketing. If you have a sorcerer, you can do Tides of Chaos. I think that's what it's called. No, Bend Luck. And then he's probably only going to need to roll like a 5, maybe a 7 to steal some of the most powerful scrolls in the game. Like you can spam the steal button across the row and probably not get caught. And then look at that. If you were afraid of all of these spell slots and like, oh no, I don't want a long rest. Look, you have all of these scrolls you can use now too. On top of that, if you're playing as a sorcerer, you can combine your scrolls with your sorcery points in order to quicken them or twin them, things like that. I bet you're not using scrolls to their max capability, so make sure don't forget about the scrolls and just steal them. Don't pay ridiculous prices for scrolls. All right, and finally, my last and 8th, 9th, whatever, however you want to count, tip is going to be Counterspell. I know it doesn't feel good. It's not sexy to have Counterspell there and waste a 3rd level spell slot because that's a fireball. Anytime you are casting Counterspell, you are losing a fireball and you're like, ah man, I don't have Fireball now, or I have 1 fewer Fireball, because that's all we care about is how many fireballs can we throw. But you fought a wizard, a sorcerer in game, and you've gone to cast a Fireball and they counterspell you. You know how bad it feels when they do it to you. And on top of that, it may not feel good to sacrifice a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th level spell slot to counterspell, but that could be the difference between one of your allies being dominated or your entire party being put to sleep. Counterspell can be so effective, and one well-timed counterspell can massively change the entire realm of combat. Realm, that's not the word I wanted to use. Whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. Please do not sleep on Counterspell. I know it's not sexy, but it is so crucial and can massively turn the tide of battle. You can just absolutely shut down enemies. And then if you have psionic dominance as well from the Illithid powers, you can use that first so you don't have to sacrifice a spell slot. But just completely negating enemy mages is a massive plus to have. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you today. That's 8, 9, a number of tips to hopefully increase your viability as a spellcaster and improve your spellcasting experience. The next time Larian releases a bunch of stats on Baldur's Gate 3, I want to see the spellcasting classes coming up a couple of notches. Also, I've seen the playable races. Quit being a bunch of basic bitches and playing as humans, huh? You get to be a human every single day of your life. Be something cool like a Dragonborn. Sorry, important side note. Did you find any of these tips helpful? Are there any of these things that you found yourself guilty of that you can now improve upon? Let me know down in the comments below. And importantly, do you have any other tips that you want to share with the rest of the community? If so, leave those down below. And if you don't have any other comments to share, just comment your favorite emoji. Because again, the comments go towards engagement. They're a massive help for me. They're a massive help for the channel, and they help other people find this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe so you get notifications from new videos like this, hit the bell, and we will see you guys in a later video. Good luck with Baldur's Gate 3, and happy spellcasting.